A few weeks ago I picked up this Commodore 128D computer for $30. At that price it was a steal. I've never actually owned a Commodore 128 before in any format, so this is a cool addition to my collection. This system is in decent shape, but could use with a good clean, and before I continue, let's address the elephant in the room. It's missing the keyboard. If you take a look at the keyboard connector, it's totally non-standard. It looks like a parallel port connector. Now just like the SX64 keyboard, trying to source one of these is impossible. So I decided to check eBay. Now this seller has a 128D for sale, so I send him a message to see if he's willing to split. Unfortunately he won't. I mean, why would he? So, given the fact that I can't find a keyboard, I'm going to go ahead and clean the unit itself, and hopefully, one day I'll be able to pick up a keyboard for it and kind of finish off the actual system itself. Now when it comes to cleaning old retro computers and consoles, the tendency is to go ahead and retro bright. Now I will say that you don't always have to retro bright your old systems. If you take a close look at the system that you're working on, it may just be that you want to just clean the gunk and grime off the particular unit. And in this particular case, the Commodore 128D that I picked up doesn't really need a retro bright. It may be one or two kind of shades of yellow more than a stock 128 as it came out of the factory many years ago, but it's really not something that's worth the trouble to take apart every piece apart and lay out in the sun for a good 4 or 5 hours. So I think with a good clean and good scrub, I can get this system coming up pretty well. So let's find out. Alright, for this system, I focus on the top shell. There's quite a few scuff marks and magic marker stains on it. I also notice there's some paint chips here and there. There's really nothing I can do about that, short of powder coating the shell. I use alcohol to clean the gunk off the case and start working on the stains. I usually switch to a magic eraser for some of the more persistent areas. This part definitely needs some elbow grease, and after about 10 or 15 minutes of scrubbing, I get all the marks off the top shell. I do the same thing on the sides and use a magic eraser on the front panel. That piece is plastic. After about 10 minutes of that, things are starting to look pretty good. So once I've cleaned the unit, I hook it up to test it out. Without a keyboard, unfortunately, I can't do much, but at least let's plug it in and make sure everything is working. I connect it up to my Commodore 1702 color monitor via chroma and luma signals, and when I turn the power on, the 128 comes to life and everything looks good. Now one thing I wanted to mention that people may not be aware of is there's actually two variants of the Commodore 128D computer, the European model and the North American model. Now the European model actually featured a plastic case. The entire casing is plastic, and it was ergonomic enough to fit the keyboard underneath the system itself, and it actually had a handle that you could utilize to carry the computer around and make it kind of semi-portable. Now the North American model, which is the one that I have, has a metallic case, and apart from the plastic front, and that was something that in North America was a requirement, a kind of FCC radio requirement with noise interference and things like that. But it didn't have the ability to latch the keyboard underneath the system, and it certainly didn't have a carry handle. And some of the actual connectors have been moved. For example, the tape port connector is on the right hand side of the North American model, but on the European model it's at the back of the case. But otherwise, both systems, or both variants of the 128D have the same functionality and kind of same chips inside the motherboard itself. So as always on this channel, let's open up the system and take a peek inside. To open the 128D is quite easy. Just unscrew the 3 screws at the back of the case. On the underside there are 2 additional screws that need to be removed as well. Once that's done, just gently press on the top case and push it away from the front portion, and the case will be removed. Simple. With the motherboard exposed, I blew some compressed air to get rid of some dust bunnies, but to be honest, this motherboard is pretty clean and doesn't need much else. The capacitors also look to be in good shape. So while we have the case off, let's take a closer look at the chips on this board and see what they do. There are actually 3 CPUs in the Commodore 128. the MOS8502, which handles the 128 and Commodore 64 compatibility, a Zilog Z80, which was used for the CP/M operating system, which was originally released in 1974. CP/M mainly provided productivity and educational software and was included in the Commodore 128 line of computers to make the machine more appealing to business users. The third CPU is a MOS Technologies 6502, which manages the built-in 1571 disk drive. The 4 RAM chips make up the machine's total of 128 kilobytes of memory. The sound chip in this 128D is the MOS8580, which has some subtle differences to the original 6581 SID chip. There are 2 separate video chips. The VIC-II chip controls the 40-column mode and is the same chip as found in the Commodore 64. The VDC chip controls the C128's 80-column mode. For this to work, you need to plug in a compatible display in the RGB port. There are 2 chips containing the basic ROMs, one for the Commodore 64 and one for the C128. The 6526 CIA chips are the same as found in the Commodore 64 and manage the input-output of internal and external peripherals, amongst other things. The C128 has a separate memory management chip, or MMU, which handles the 128 MB of RAM and allows for memory to be shared between different RAM banks. These 2 switches are to reset the disk drive and soft reset the system without having to power cycle the computer. And as mentioned, the cassette port lives on the right-hand side of the motherboard. With the system cleaned and tested working, there's not much else I can do except stare at a blinking cursor. I'm pretty much resigned to the fact that I have a neat piece of hardware but can't do anything with it. So I just got a line on some 128D keyboards on eBay, so let's go check them out. I picked up this lot of 2 keyboards and a Commodore 1351 mouse for $180. Still way more than I wanted to pay, but I figure I could sell one of the keyboards and recoup some money back. And who knows when another keyboard would actually show up. These keyboards are marked as untested, so I'm definitely taking a gamble here. When they arrived, I take a close look at them. One of them is nice and yellow and the other is fairly white. So I decide to clean the whiter one, but before I do anything I test the keyboards. As expected, they both work fine. However, I'm having some issues with some keys sticking. The seller mentioned this and I think they just need a good clean to fix that particular issue. Now, cleaning the keyboard is far and away my least favorite thing, and there's no real easy way to skim over this. In order to properly clean the keyboard, I unscrew and remove the plastic case, both top and bottom, to expose the keyboard part. I clean the plastic pieces with Windex and a magic eraser for the stubborn areas. After a few minutes, these are starting to look pretty good. Next, I lift and remove each key individually. These keys have springs underneath them, so be careful if you are doing this yourself that you don't lose any of the springs. After a few minutes of doing that, you can see how dirty this is. I then use a dust buster to get any easy to remove dust from the keyboard, and then I spray Windex on it and clean the plastic, making sure that I hit all the areas. This starts to come up nicely. Next, I move downstairs and clean each key in the kitchen sink in soap and warm water, every single key, and let them dry. Now this part can easily take 30 minutes. Once the keys are dry, I start to reassemble the keyboard. After 10 minutes or so, everything is reassembled. I fit the keyboard back in the plastic shell, but before I'm done, this magic marker scribble underneath has been bugging me, and fortunately it removes quite easily. Now this Commodore mouse is a pretty easy thing to clean. It's actually in great shape, just a few minor stains here and there, and they come out quite easily. I certainly don't need to take the case apart. Now the Commodore mouse is definitely something that I'm glad to have as part of this pickup as well, and now I have the ability to try this out with some stuff, for example GEOS, the graphical operating system that came out for the Commodore 64 and 128, as well as a couple of games. So I definitely want to try this out and see how well this performs in the real world. Now I want to make sure the mouse is functional, so I test a couple of different things. I tried GEOS, which is the graphical operating system, as well as Arkanoid and Operation Wolf by Taito. These games are pretty awesome, and I always remember playing them with a joystick back in the day, but with a mouse they run exceptionally well, especially Arkanoid, which is almost unplayable with a keyboard in my opinion. So here's how the system turned out. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments below. So guys, what did you think of the Commodore 128D adventure that I had? Hopefully you enjoyed this video. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have any questions about the video or anything else, leave a comment below and I'll be happy to answer. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. Have a good one.